A sharp, high-pitched yelp shattered the early calm over Whispering Pines Wildlife Sanctuary, carried across the sunlit Montana plains like a flare. It came from Max, a 4-month-old German Shepherd pup whose mismatched eyes one sky blue. The other chestnut brown had trailed a drifting monarch butterfly beyond the safety of the canine training grounds. The sound halted even Samson, the weathered silverback gorilla, in mid-chew. No one noticed the python until it struck a silent explosion of muscle and scales from the underbrush. It coiled around Max in an instant. From a distance, parental barks erupted in panic. What unfolded next would be called impossible, even miraculous. 35 years I've been out here, Ranger Jack Thompson would later mutter, eyes wide with disbelief, and I ain't never seen anything like that. The gorilla charged, the serpent reared back. The dog pack closed in. By sunrise, the next morning, everything at Whispering Pines had changed forever. Whispering Pines wasn't just any refugiate stretched across 300 rugged acres of untouched Montana backcountry, a patchwork of golden meadows and towering pines. It was home to two worlds separated by a 15-foot barrier, one for rescued wild animals, the other for elite service and rescue dog training. But as nature often proves, fences mean little when fate intervenes. For 35 years, Ranger Jack Thompson had watched over it all. At 62, his leathery face bore the marks of time and weather. His Alabama drawl, softened by decades of mountain wind, was as much a part of the sanctuary as the twisted oak that stood at its heart. Animals got more sense than most folks I know, he'd tell visitors with a tip of his sun-faded Ranger hat. Only difference is, they talk with their eyes. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had joined the sanctuary's staff 5 years back. After a storied career researching primate cognition at Cornell, at 42, she'd found her purpose in Samson, a gorilla whose past was inked in pain and resilience. He doesn't just think, she'd argue during staff meetings. He feels, he remembers. Many rolled their eyes until the day they saw the truth in his actions. Samson had been rescued a decade earlier from a poacher's camp in the Congolese jungle. His family was slaughtered. He survived. A machete had left a savage scar down his broad back, and ever since he lived in silence, watching the world through knowing eyes. On the other side of the sanctuary, the German shepherds trained daily. Duke, a battle-scarred veteran of Afghanistan, still moved with a soldier's calm. His mate Bella had pulled survivors from wreckage after earthquakes. Their newest litter of pups showed promise, but Max, with those curious eyes, always wandered a little too far. That morning started quiet, the kind of peace you only find at dawn in the wild. Mist clung to the grasses as the pine branches filtered golden light onto the fields. Jack, coffee in hand, made his usual first stop at Samson's enclosure. The gorilla sat cross-legged by a boulder, sorting through breakfast papaya chunks, carrots, and leafy greens. "Morning, big man," Jack called softly. "Looks like we're in for a hot one." Samson lifted his gaze, steady and deliberate. It was always like being scanned, not by an animal, but by something deeper, older. Jack never minded the scrutiny. Across the compound, Dr. Mitchell jotted notes on her clipboard. "He's pacing more today," she muttered, watching Samson's measured steps along the eastern fence. "Storms rolling in. I swear he senses pressure shifts." Jack adjusted his hat. "Critters always do. They just feel it before we see it." Over at the canine field, Duke led the drills like a general inspecting his troops. Commands snapped through the air, and the shepherds responded with precision. Bella demonstrated scent detection with the grace of experience, nose to ground, tail high. Their puppies, separated in a smaller area, were still learning. Max sat attentively well for a minute. His siblings stayed focused on their handler. But Max's mismatched eyes had locked onto a monarch butterfly floating just beyond the training line. "Max, eyes up," the trainer called sharply. The pup flicked an ear, refocused, then glanced again at the butterfly. It drifted closer, danced a little. Max hesitated, torn between instinct and impulse. Then, as the handler turned to correct another pup, Max bolted his paws, barely touching the ground as he gave chase. The butterfly led him past the boundary flags, beyond the training mats, into the knee-high grass that bordered the older sections of the sanctuary. "Max," the trainer shouted, running forward, But the pup was already gone lost to the pull of the butterfly, to the dangerous curiosity of youth. Max scampered past the tool shed, down the slight slope, and toward a neglected part of the land. The drainage ditch that skirted Samson's enclosure. The place hadn't seen regular foot traffic in months. What no one at Whispering Pines realized was that something else had arrived 3 days earlier, during a storm that knocked out power to the Prescott estate 5 miles down the road. A predator had slipped free. A 17-foot Burmese python, weighing just shy of 200 pounds, had breached its failed enclosure during the thunderstorm. It slithered out under cover of night, drawn by the warmth of the land and the possibility of food. For days, it traveled unseen, hugging the terrain's curves until it reached the sanctuary. There, it settled encoiled within the drainage ditch, camouflaged by a bed of rotting leaves and brown earth. It lay motionless, patient, its cold hunger waiting. Now, as Max's paws rustled the grass overhead, the python stirred. Its forked tongue flicked once. The air tasted of warm mammal and wild adrenaline. Screaming, her barks hoarse from panic and effort, while Duke limped a few steps back, panting heavily, blood dripping into his eyes. Samson didn't rush. He advanced with an eerie calm, each step deliberate, measured. His massive hand reached out and closed around the python's body just behind its head. The snake reacted instantly, whipping toward this new assailant, but Samson didn't flinch. With shocking precision and strength, he wrenched the serpent's body upward, twisting in a motion that would be impossible for any human to replicate. There was a sickening snap, the sound of vertebrae separating. The python's grip loosened. Max's body tumbled free, unmoving. Dr. Mitchell ran to the puppy, dropping to her knees. "He's still breathing," she shouted, voice cracking. With urgency, Ranger Jack radioed the emergency team again. "We need medical now. Puppy's alive. Snake neutralized." Behind them, Samson stood with the python's body dangling from his grip, then dropped it without ceremony. The gorilla let out a low, guttural grunt, then turned and walked calmly back toward his enclosure, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Ranger Jack stared, awestruck. "He's going back," he whispered. "He knows." Bella rushed to Max's side, licking his face furiously. Duke limped beside her, gently nosing his pup. The tension broke like a dam. Tears welled in Dr. Mitchell's eyes as she checked Max's vitals. "He's got a chance," she murmured. "That gorilla, he gave him a chance." Around them, the handlers and staff who had finally arrived stood frozen, witnessing a scene that no training manual could have prepared them for. The predator had been stopped, not by force or firepower, but by a being they thought they understood, who had just rewritten everything they believed about animal intelligence. As Samson re-entered the torn fence line, Ranger Jack jogged after him. "We'll repair this," he muttered, not even sure who he was talking to. "We'll fix it better this time." Samson paused just inside his enclosure and looked back, not at Jack, not at the crowd, at Duke. For a long moment, the old gorilla and the battle-worn German shepherd held each other's gaze. There was no sound, no movement, only something unspoken shared between two warriors who had once again saved one another's lives. Later that night, as the sanctuary went still, the story spread among the staff, the volunteers, and eventually the world. A tale too surreal to believe, and yet it had happened. Samson's act of courage, Duke's trust, Bella's fight, all of it, became legend. Max would recover with time, but what none of them would forget was the moment when a creature long assumed to be past his prime proved that compassion, memory, and courage weren't traits reserved for humans. In the heart of the wilderness, in a place built to protect, the wild had protected one of its own. And the line between species blurred for just long enough to remind everyone what loyalty truly meant. Trying to pull her puppy to safety, Bella lunged in and snapped at the python's thick hide. But every time its head whipped around, she had to leap back, snarling in panic. Unlike the dogs, whose bites barely scratched the snake's armor-like skin, Samson advanced like a born warrior. The gorilla's massive hands, capable of both precision and power, moved with terrifying intent. With startling accuracy, he clamped one enormous hand around the python's head, crushing its jaw with a grip no animal could match. Sensing the true alpha in the clearing, the python instinctively loosened its coils just enough for Bella to dart in. seize her lifeless puppy by the scruff, and pull him clear of the melee. That was all Samson needed. His hands shifted position, locking onto the midsection of the serpent, and with a guttural roar that echoed through the trees like thunder, he began to pry the coils apart, muscle by muscle. The snake's body writhed furiously, but its power was no match for Samson's fury, with a strength few had ever witnessed. Samson tore the python away from the ditch, swung the beast over his shoulder, and hurled it into the open field with such force that the ground shook beneath the impact. The snake hit the dirt like a dropped tree limb, stunned and disoriented. Before it could slither away, Samson planted himself between the serpent and the dog's massive frame, a living barricade. His heaving chest wasn't a show of rigid, was exhaustion earned through pure will. Realizing it had been bested, the python gave up its hunt and began retreating, sliding its battered body toward the outer edge of the reserve. In moments, it vanished into the brush, leaving only silence in its wake. For a beat, no one moved. Then, slowly, Samson turned back toward Max. The little puppy lay crumpled where Bella had left him, his patchy coat soaked, his breathing non-existent. Bella whined, nuzzling his side, while Duke stood like a statue, motionless body. Ranger Jack and Dr. Mitchell stepped forward cautiously, still stunned by the gorilla's intervention. Neither spoke, but their instincts screamed urgency. "We've got to get that pup to the clinic. Now," Jack said, his voice low but shaking. "He's not moving." But before either of them could take another step, Samson knelt beside the puppy, his hands, those massive, brutal hands, moving with the tenderness of a surgeon. Duke and Bella stiffened but didn't interfere. With a gentleness that made Dr. Mitchell's breath catch, Samson rolled Max onto his side and pressed a finger to the pup's ribs. The jungle fell quiet. "He's checking for breath, Mitchell," whispered, her mind scrambling to absorb what she was seeing. "He's actually trying to tell if the pup's alive." But when there was no response, the silverback did something that shook them all, in what Mitchell would later call a moment of primal medicine. Samson began to compress Max's tiny chest, then release, release. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. On the third push, Max's frail body jerked violently. He coughed water and mucus splashing from his snout, then gasped for air. His mismatched eyes blinked open, dazed but alive. Bella surged forward, licking his face, crying softly with relief, while Duke lowered his head beside them, still wary but grateful. Samson sat back slowly, his broad shoulders sagging, and watched. There was no gloating in his expression, just quiet understanding, something ancient and knowing. For a long second, he locked eyes with the two humans still frozen in place. Ranger Jack blinked hard. I've never seen anything like this," he muttered, his years of field work offering no explanation. "Not in all my life. This rewrites what we know," Mitchell whispered, her voice trembling with awe, empathy, logic. He recognized the danger, understood the risk, performed a rescue, then resuscitated the puppy. This is revolutionary. Max, now conscious and trembling, nestled into his mother's fur as the sanctuary's emergency team arrived, called by Jack moments earlier. They stopped in their tracks. The sight before them was a portrait of wild contradiction, a family of German shepherds, a peaceful silverback gorilla, and two stunned humans. "Hold your fire," Jack shouted, raising his hand to block any rash decisions. "No tranks unless absolutely necessary. Do you hear me?" The team held position. As Dr. Mitchell approached slowly, her voice soft like a lullaby. "Samson," she said, the name almost a prayer. "You saved him. Thank you." It felt strange thanking a creature they once feared, but it was the only thing that felt right. "But we need to get you back home now, okay?" To the astonishment of everyone watching, Samson rose, towering and calm. He glanced once more at Max, now sitting upright between his parents, and then turned toward the damaged section of fence. With the same deliberate grace that defined him, the gorilla crossed the yard and returned to his enclosure, slipping through the bent bars. Like a ghost, then seating himself on the flat stone that had always been his perch. No one spoke. Ranger Jack exhaled hard, only now realizing he'd been holding his breath. "Call maintenance. That fence needs fixing right now," he ordered, snapping back to protocol. "And someone alert the vet, get that pup inside." The team carefully lifted Max, Bella, and Duke, flanking them protectively. But Mitchell stayed where she was, staring at the gorilla framed behind the torn fence. "You've known this whole time, haven't you?" she whispered. "All these years you've understood us." Samson's gaze met hers again, bottomless and ancient, as if he'd heard her. As the sun broke through the clouds above Whispering Pines Wildlife Sanctuary, word of the morning's miracle spread like wildfire. Every staffer, every volunteer, every visitor heard the story, the gorilla who broke free not to harm, but to save a life, and then returned, as if guided by something deeper than instinct. By late afternoon, the fence was nearly repaired, and the viewing area remained packed with people, hoping to glimpse the beast who defied every expectation. In the brightly lit exam room, Dr. Eleanor Winters leaned over Max's small form as he slept under mild sedation, his breath steady, his heartbeat strong. The rhythm in the exam room had stabilized, something that felt almost impossible just hours before. The puppy's vitals were holding, but the situation was still serious. 3 fractured ribs, heavy bruising along his side, and signs of oxygen loss that could leave lasting neurological damage. "He's a fighter," Dr. Winters murmured. To Ranger Jack, who stood quietly in the doorway, clutching his worn-out hat in both hands, 30 more seconds wrapped in those coils and we'd be having a very different talk right now. She paused, her gaze drifting. That gorilla's timing? There's no technical word for it, just ... miraculous. Outside the exam room, Duke and Bella waited restlessly in the corridor, neither of them eating or drinking. Eyes fixed on the door, their pup had disappeared behind. The remaining 6 puppies had been moved to another wing of the clinic, curled into a pile, sensing something was wrong but too young to grasp what. Meanwhile, in the sanctuary's main office overlooking Samson's habitat, Dr. Sarah Mitchell replayed the surveillance footage frame by frame. She studied the calculated way Samson had tested the perimeter, his decisive advance toward the commotion, the eerie flash of recognition between him and Ducan, most astonishing of all, the crude yet shockingly effective way he revived Max. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the news broke. Calls came in from research institutions, national news outlets, and documentary crews, all scrambling for exclusivity on what was already being dubbed a landmark case of interspecies empathy. "I can't explain it," she told her old mentor. From Cornell, for the 3rd time that day, "This isn't standard behavior, not even close. It goes beyond survival instincts. This suggests memory, emotional connection, maybe even intent. We've never recorded anything like this from a gorilla, not in the wild, not in captivity." As the day wore on, the sanctuary's administrative building turned into a crisis response center of a very different nature. Harriet Blackwood, the 68-year-old head of Whispering Pines, was fielding nonstop calls from the sanctuary board, wildlife officials, and, most disturbingly, lawyers, representing William Prescott. Prescott, a 55-year-old tech millionaire turned eccentric recluse, owned a questionable collection of exotic animals on his nearby estate. His legal team was already spinning a narrative, blaming the sanctuary for the python's intrusion and pushing for Samson's removal or, worse, his destruction as a threat to public safety. "That's absurd," Harriet snapped, her Boston accent thickening with every syllable, as it always did when she was furious. "Your client smuggled in that python illegally. I might have downed it escaped from his rundown facility. It nearly killed a working service dog in training. If anyone should be answering for this, it's Prescott." She hung up before the attorney could respond, her jaw clenched tight. By late afternoon, reporters had begun gathering outside the gates. Ranger Jack, selected as the sanctuary's spokesperson for his calm demeanor and respected role in the community, delivered a brief but steady statement. He confirmed the basics, reassured the public, and made it clear that no visitors or staff were ever in direct danger. "The safety of our animals and our guests remains our highest priority," he told the press, his voice firm. Cameras captured the strain on his face, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. "We're investigating how the snake got onto our property and how the gorilla got out of his habitat. In the meantime, all tours of the primate exhibits are on hold." As dusk settled over the sanctuary, finally bringing a lull to the chaos, Dr. Mitchell made her final rounds. She stopped first at the recovery wing, where Max had been moved after surgery. The puppy was awake, groggy but alive, his sides wrapped tightly in gauze. When she entered, his tail gave a feeble wag. Duke and Bella had been granted access at last. They stood guard beside him, Duke's steady gaze following her every step, while Bella softly groomed Max's face, offering the only comfort she could. "He's surprising us all," Dr. Winters said, scanning Max's latest readings. "Oxygen levels are coming up. Neurologically, he's responding better than expected. Puppies are tough little things. He's got a real shot." Dr. Mitchell nodded, the tension in her shoulders easing. She left the clinic and walked back toward the primate section. Samson was seated against his usual boulder, his back to the bars, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. The repair crew had already reinforced the enclosure, and 2 temporary guards now stood watch. It wasn't punishment, it was protocol, but still, it stung. "You've stirred up quite a storm today," she said gently, approaching the fence. Samson turned his head toward her, eyes deep and calm in the fading light. "But you saved him," she whispered. "You knew something the rest of us didn't." The gorilla didn't respond right away. Then, slowly, deliberately, he raised one massive hand and pressed it to his chest. Dr. Mitchell's breath caught. That gesture, he used it rarely, only in reference to himself, during the few rudimentary sign language sessions they'd shared. "Yes," she said quietly, blinking back sudden tears. You did something today that defies everything we thought we understood, something extraordinary." The next morning brought no relief. Harriet had called a meeting of all senior staff in the conference room, her expression grim. "Prescott's filed a formal complaint with the State Wildlife Board," she said. "He's accusing us of negligence for letting his breeding specimen get hurt. Worse, he wants Samson declared dangerous and either put down or locked in a high-security facility." The room erupted. Ranger Jack slammed his palm on the table so hard it shook. "That's the most backwards thing I've heard in my life," he growled. "That snake shouldn't have been anywhere near our grounds." Samson saved a pup and went right back into his pen. He didn't hurt a soul. Dr. Mitchell nodded, fire in her voice. "His behavior wasn't violent. It was measured, calculated. It was compassion, Jack. That's what we saw. He shouldn't be punished. He should be protected." Harriet raised her hands, calming the room. "I agree with you both," she said, "but you need to understand what we're up against. Prescott's got friends in politics. He's donated to half the commissioners on that board. And he's been trying to buy the east tract of land including Samson's habitat for years. This wasn't just about real estate anymore," Dr. Winters, Harriet said evenly. "He's turning this incident into a bargaining chip." "Partially," Harriet admitted, "but it goes deeper than that. Dr. Mitchell, your initial assessment suggests Samson demonstrated cognitive processing and emotional empathy, not just toward another species, but at a level beyond what's ever been recorded in a gorilla. If that can be confirmed," she added, "it could reshape legal standards around primate welfare, especially for great apes." And with that, the stakes skyrocketed. No longer just about a single gorilla or one wounded pup, the battle had widened, possibly threatening the very legality of private primate ownership. Like Prescott's shadowy collection, as the meeting wrapped with legal strategy assignments and media prep underway, Dr. Mitchell made a quiet detour to the clinic. To her surprise, Max was sitting upright in his recovery pen, looking sharper, steadier than she dared expect after yesterday. But what startled her most was his reaction when she stepped in. His mismatched eyes instantly lit with recognition. Despite the gauze and bandages binding his torso, he tried to rise. "Whoa, slow down, brave boy," she said softly, keeping him from overexerting. "You've got to heal first." Dr. Winters emerged from her back office with her clipboard. "Doing better than I anticipated," she said, flipping through notes. "The swelling in his rib cage's gone down fast, and his reflexes are fully responsive." She hesitated, then added, "He's been whimpering for his parents. We're authorizing short visits starting today." Dr. Mitchell gently ran her fingers through Max's fur, feeling the quiet resolve in him. "There's something rare in him," she murmured. Dr. Winters nodded. "The trainers always said he was the most perceptive in his class. Less obedient, but startlingly clever. That's why we were thinking of shifting him to SAR instead of general service." A thought clicked into place. Dr. Mitchell leaned in. "Has Max ever acted unusually around Samson? I mean, before the incident, anything strange?" Dr. Winters paused. "You know, now that you ask, yeah. One of the handlers mentioned Max often lingered at the edge of Samson's enclosure during his runs, said he'd just sit there like he was waiting on something. We figured it was puppy curiosity. That afternoon, under careful monitoring, Max was allowed a brief reunion with his parents, Duke and Bella. While the family nuzzled and reassured one another, Dr. Mitchell stationed herself quietly near Samson's habitat. The silverback had been unsettled all morning, pacing the edge of the enclosure closest to the clinic as if anticipating something. When the door finally opened and Max emerged between his parents, supported by a custom mobility harness, Samson stopped pacing. He shifted toward the fence, crouched low, and waited. Dr. Mitchell hit record. What unfolded next would become a cornerstone in the legal storm that lay ahead. As the dogs approached the enclosure, Max abruptly tugged at his straps, pulling in the direction of the gorilla habitat. His parents' stiffened butt, incredibly, did not stop him. Instead, Duke gave a low chuff, and both adults guided their injured son closer to the fence. Samson, massive and still, lowered his frame until his eyes aligned with the puppy's. The air turned reverent. No barking, no roaring. 5 long minutes passed as they studied one another across the barrier. Not as predator and prey, but as something far more mysterious than. Trembling with effort, Max lifted his paw and pressed it against the metal. On the other side, Samson responded, gently placing a single blackened finger to meet the same point. Connection, Dr. Mitchell whispered, heart pounding, her camera steady. A genuine, deliberate act of recognition, and maybe gratitude. The moment fractured with the sound of tires crunching gravel. A sleek black SUV rolled up to the front gates. William Prescott had arrived. He wasn't alone. Trailing him were his lawyer and a state wildlife official. Harriet greeted them at the admin wing, chin high despite the weight of her 68 years. Dr. Mitchell scrambled, packing up her equipment and racing to join. She clutched the camera like a lifeline, because the footage inside might determine everything. Prescott looked like power in tailored form. Tall, polished, dangerous. "Mrs. Blackwood," he began, skipping pleasantries, "I'm here to assess the damage to my assets and discuss the future of the animal responsible." Harriet's voice was cold steel. "If by assets you mean an illegally imported Burmese python that escaped your facility and trespassed into our zit, vanished yesterday, and if by animal responsible you mean the gorilla who risked his life to rescue an injured pup, then no, he's not up for inspection." Commissioner Thompson, middle-aged and clearly uneasy, cleared his throat. "We're obligated to review any case involving a primate breach, ma'am." "Samson didn't escape," Dr. Mitchell interrupted firmly, stepping into view with the camera. "He made a conscious decision to intervene in a lethal situation. He protected the puppy using advanced cognitive behaviors and then returned to his enclosure without coercion. I've logged his behavior for 5 years. What I saw yesterday goes beyond precedent." Prescott gave her a condescending smile. "Lovely story, but fiction doesn't outweigh public safety. A gorilla left his cage, that's a liability, not a miracle." The debate ignited. Legal threats, scientific rebuttals. But across the compound, something was unfolding again. Max had been brought back to the clinic to rest, curled protectively between Duke and Bella. But a surprise was waiting. The rest of his litter. 6 puppies were ushered in for a short visit. They swarmed gently around him, nosing his bandages and licking his ears. And then, something strange happened, the supervising trainer swore later. The puppies began to still to listen. Max whined, soft and rhythmic. His ears flicked. He didn't bark, didn't growl. But somehow, the others understood. They circled tighter around him, alert, as if a message had passed between them. One humans couldn't hear, but couldn't miss. That evening, a fragile ceasefire had taken hold. The Wildlife Commission announced they'd launch a full-scale inquiry over the next 2 weeks before ruling on Samson's fate. Prescott had been barred from interacting with the gorilla for now, though he demanded updates on the python incident. The sanctuary stayed locked down to visitors, with new security details stationed at every gate. As night descended, Dr. Duck Mitchell sat alone in her office, scrolling through surveillance footage and jotting notes into her battered field journal. The scientific weight of Samson's behavior hinted at something extraordinary, but her focus was narrower, more urgent. How to keep the gorilla safe from Prescott's clear ambition to have him removed. A knock broke her concentration. Ranger Jack stepped in, his face drawn but eyes sharp. "You're going to want to hear this," he said without ceremony. "I've been digging into Prescott's background, his collection of exotic animals. It's more than a billionaire's playground, a contact at Fish and Wildlife told me. There've been quiet whispers, possible smuggling of endangered species, rooted through his private land." Dr. Mitchell straightened. "Do they have anything solid?" Jack shook his head. "Not enough for a warrant, but it might explain why he's so eager to control this narrative and bury any scandal." Her expression darkened. "So we're not just protecting Samson," she said carefully. "We might be peeling back something way bigger." Jack nodded. "That's my take too, but we've got to move smart. Prescott's not the kind of man who lets obstacles live long." As they began to sketch out a cautious plan, neither of them realized what was unfolding across the compound beneath the canopy of a starless sky. In the K9 training yard, Duke and Bella had quietly slipped away from the clinic, where Max was still recovering. They had gathered their 6 pups into a solemn circle beneath the silvery moon. The adult German shepherds moved like soldiers, leading the younger ones on a hushed perimeter sweep. At each fence break, air duct, and runoff grate, they paused, murmuring, teaching. Their gestures were subtle, but their intent unmistakable, a methodical scan of the sanctuary's weak points, as if conducting their own covert security drill. From his reinforced night quarters, Samson observed it all through. The Glassie's powerful brow furrowed in thought. His eyes missed nothing. In that ghostlit yard, under the hush of the pines, he watched the dogs work with surgical precision. The next day would bring more scrutiny, more posturing from Prescott's camp. But tonight, a new kind of alliance was forming, silent, strategic, and rooted in instincts too old for language. Not just among the humans locked in political war, but among the animals, who understood danger in ways science still couldn't measure. Inside the clinic, Max stirred in his sleep. His body ached, but mended while his mind drifted. In dream, the puppy ran pain-free beside a massive silverback through wild green fields with no gates. No threats only, freedom morning broke over whispering pines under a warning sky. Ominous gray clouds stacked low and heavy above the ridgelines. The national weather service issued sudden storm alerts, rare for the season, predicting high winds and possible flash flooding in the eastern sections. Ranger Jack stood on the steps of his cabin, coffee in hand, eyes scanning the churning horizon. His gut told him this wasn't just another squall. "This one's gonna hit hard," he muttered. Years in Montana had taught him to trust the signs. He radioed the night team, lock down loose gear, clear storm drains, and test the generators. In her Spartan bunk room beside Samson's enclosure, Dr. Mitchell sat bolt upright at the sound of distant thunder. She hadn't slept. Most of the night had gone into reviewing old case studies of animal intervention, building her case to block Prescott's interference. 13 days. That's all they had left before the commission ruled on Samson's future. At the clinic, Dr. Winters arrived before sunrise. Max's progress had been nothing short of remarkable. Part youth, part sheer willpower, she thought. Privately, she didn't expect to find him awake. But there he was, sitting upright in bed, alert eyes fixed on the window, watching the black sky tremble. "You feel it too, huh?" she whispered, checking his vitals. "You dogs always know before we do." Across the property, final storm prep was in full swing. Maintenance crews secured the roof lines and cleared runoff ditches. Animal care teams verified every enclosure had safe shelter. All the German shepherds were moved inside except Duke and Bella. They remained stationed outside the clinic doors, standing guard over their wounded pup. In the admin building, William Prescott had arrived unannounced, trailed by 2 men he introduced as environmental consultants. Harriet Blackwood, though wary, allowed limited access to files on Samson's care, but placed a staff attorney at their side. "Your emergency protocols seem underwhelming," Prescott said, surveying the flurry of activity through the window. "I see the eastern zone flooded during last spring's thaw." "All resolved over the summer," Harriet snapped. "Every enclosure now meets or exceeds federal specs for extreme weather." Prescott scribbled something in his leather notebook and gave a crooked smile. "Well, we'll see. Nature has a habit of revealing weaknesses we pretend aren't there." By late afternoon, the storm arrived, meaner than forecasted. Gusts hit 60 miles per hour, snapping tree limbs like twigs and turning the whispering pines into a blur of rain and thunder. Visibility dropped to nearly nothing. Lightning ripped across the sky in violent flashes. Thunder shook the walls. In Samson's compound, the silverback had retreated inside, but stayed close to the glass, tracking every movement. Each soaked worker, every ATV speeding through the mud, his gaze never wavered. When lightning lit, up the hill, his eyes always darted toward the clinic, where Max lay. From her nearby shelter, Dr. Mitchell noticed the pattern and quietly hit record on her voice memo. "He's watching," she whispered. "He knows what matters most." ChatGPT not reacting to the storm like most animals would Max. Wasn't trembling or trying to hide from the thunder. His eyes were fixed outside, laser-focused on the vet clinic's outer fence line, and the building beyond trouble hit as the sun disappeared and Whispering Pine's main power grid collapsed. Backup generators kicked in automatically, illuminating only the sanctuary's most vital structures, like the vet clinic and primate nighthouse's ranger. Jack, already soaked through, despite his waterproof gear, coordinated emergency crews from the old storage barn culverts overflowing on the east side crackled. A voice threw static from a drenched staffer, waters surging into the lower fields. "We need pumps down there now," Jack responded fast. "Keep the flood off the habitats and anything tied to life support." What no one on site had yet realized was that the chaotic storm was the perfect smokescreen for something far more sinister. While the team scrambled to manage rising water, a nondescript van rolled up to a forgotten back road on the sanctuary's east edge. Tinted windows concealed its cargo, 3 men in black rain. Gear stepped out, their faces hidden, weapons wrapped tight to their chests beneath the gear. Tranquilizer rifles just visible inside the administration. Office. A buzz from Prescott's phone brought a grin. He stood up from the crisis meeting, citing a need to inspect damage on his nearby property. No one questioned it, not with the storm. Demanding full attention outside, as flood reports grew, the 3 men slipped silently through the night. The downpour masked their steps. The power outage concealed their shadows. They knew the patrol schedule by heart, and weren't heading for the heavily monitored guerrilla zone they veered. Instead, toward the clinic, each step part of a carefully rehearsed plan laid out the day before. Inside, under dim backup lights, Dr. Enters moved, methodically checking animals recovering from surgery. Max, the puppy, however, wasn't resting. Instead, he paced nervously, whimpering at the door, wound dressing damp but intact. "What's wrong with you, little man?" she murmured, brushing his side gently. "The storm will pass." But Max wasn't worried about thunder or wind. Couldn't detect. His nose caught the approaching scent of oil-laced metal, the sterile sting of sedatives, the kind he'd been exposed to in early training beyond the clinic's roof. Duke and Bella sheltered quietly until a change in the air made them rise simultaneously. Duke bristled his growl, drowned by the storm. Bella turned in a tight circle, then without hesitation, both dogs vanished into the darkness like ghosts, heading east where the scent trail thickened at the service entrance. The 3 intruders hit their first snag. The door, their intel claimed, would be left ajar for emergencies, was bolted tight. One of them worked frantically at the lock, another hissed into the radio static. Prescott's voice answered, "Change of plan. Main target, unsecured and power transition, move to Alpha now." The men exchanged a brief look, abandoned the clinic attempt, and shifted direction, heading toward the guerrilla zone, their true goal. Clearing his enclosure, Samson the silverback had been uneasy all night, not panicked, just deeply unsettled. Power flickers, storms, strange smells. His instincts knew something was off when the lights blinked out completely during the generator switch. The electronic locks went dead. Just for 7 seconds, but that was enough. Samson pushed the door with deliberate force and stepped into the stormy yard, moving swiftly toward a blind spot, where the cameras rarely reached. At that same moment, Duke and Bella intercepted the armed men near the guerrilla compound, bursting from the shadows with trained precision. Bella let out a sharp bark during a pause, and the wind intruders turned, but it was too late. Duke had already flanked them, hitting the first hard behind the knees, sending his tranquilizer rifle spinning into the mud. Bella lunged at the second, her teeth latching onto his forearm. Drawing blood even through the slick rain gear, the third managed to shoot, a dart grazing Bella's side just as Duke tackled him clean. Into a flooded trench, guards finally noticed the commotion and cut spotlights through the storm, but their focus stayed on the fight. No one saw the section of fence at the back of Samson's habitat that had been silently taken apart by the guerrillas. Own massive Hans Prescott, meanwhile, was already en route to a rendezvous point where a fourth accomplice waited behind the wheel of a heavily modified transport rig. The plan had always been simple: stir up chaos, pull the guerrilla in the confusion, and vanish by morning. Authorities would blame the storm for the loss, and Prescott would gain a priceless specimen capable of things most never believed. "Where's Johnson and the team?" the driver asked as Prescott climbed into the truck. "Setbacks," Prescott muttered, "but its fine extraction team should be inbound. Now stay ready back inside the clinic." Max was now frantic in his desperation. The puppy had nudged open his kennel when Winters left to tend another animal and dragged himself across the room, torn bandages trailing behind. By the time she noticed, he was already pawing at the clinic's rear exit, whimpering low and sharp, "Max, stop, you're tearing your sutures." Winters ran over, but froze when the pup let out a sound she'd never heard from him, a deep snarl far beyond his normal temperament. Startled, she paused, and just then the backup power cycled again, disengaging the automatic lock. Max pushed the handle with his snout and slipped out before she could. "Stop him, Max," she shouted, running to the door, but stopped at the edge as lightning lit the grounds, flooded, and chaotic wind howled through the trees. Grabbing her radio, she called it an urgent broadcast from vet clinic. "Max is loose, injured. Puppy heading toward Sector 4 into the heart of the sanctuary." Darkness beneath rippled across the sanctuary grounds as Ranger Jack, already knee-deep in a brewing crisis with intruders and rising floodwaters, felt the weight of a new emergency hit him square in the chest. "All units, get to Sector 4 now," he barked into the sputtering radio. "Priority is the injured pup. Get him safe." What no one at Whispering Pines could have guessed was that Max wasn't lost or wandering aimlessly. Even in the brutal storm, despite his wounds, the little pup was charging forward with an eerie sense of purpose, heading straight for the eastern border, where Duke and Bella were still locked in a tense standoff with the trespassers and On-Edge security teams. And cutting through the darkness, unseen but deliberate, the massive form of Samson was moving, too drawn by frequencies only he seemed to hear in the howling wind, led by an intuition beyond what science could explain. A searing bolt of lightning cracked the sky open like a broken bone, turning the night into a frozen snapshot from a nightmare. In that flash, it all became clear: 3 trajectories, barreling toward a singular collision, a battered puppy dragging his limp frame through a flood-slicked path, his parents still holding the front lines against human threat, and a silverback charging with calm, terrifying focus toward a reckoning that would permanently alter the sanctuary's fate. In a black SUV at the east gate, Prescott tapped his watch, lips tight with irritation. "They should have checked in by now," he muttered, grabbing his phone. His driver stiffened, pointing into the downpour. "Sir, what the hell is that?" Prescott leaned forward, squinting at the curtains of rain just past the headlights. For a second, nothing. Then a colossal figure emerged from the murk, walking directly toward them with bone-chilling precision. "Start the engine," Prescott hissed, the fear creeping into his voice. "Start it now." As the clock neared midnight, the storm turned feral. Rain slammed into structures like fists, and the wind was flinging debris with such force that it shattered branches and windows alike. Every new lightning strike offered chaotic snapshots, a sanctuary morphing into a war zone, man versus elements, animal versus invader, order drowning in disorder. At the gate, Prescott's driver fumbled at the ignition, the dashboard dead. The wipers froze mid-sweep, leaving them blind in the storm. Through the smeared glass, the silhouette outside loomed larger, each flash of light revealing more of the beast. "Get us out of here," Prescott shouted, his voice rising above the wind as realization dawned. Samson was coming for them. The driver yanked the key again. "Electrical's dead," he yelled. "Everything was fine 10 minutes ago." Neither man had any idea the SUV had been quietly sabotaged the night before. Part of the sanctuary's layered defenses, Duke had caught the scent of the unfamiliar vehicle during a patrol and had brought along Shadow, their eldest pups, specially trained in delicate extraction techniques. Under the cover of night, she had slipped beneath the SUV and skillfully removed a key fuse from the engine, a maneuver she'd been drilled on for tactical ops. Now, with Samson closing in, Prescott panicked. Throwing dignity aside, he yanked, opened the door, and fled into the tempest. The driver shouted after him, but Prescott didn't look back. He barely made it 10 steps before his foot plunged into a flooded drainage trench, his ankle twisted with a crack, and he face-planted into the mud. Another flash-hand Samson was standing over him, 7 feet of primal dominance, rain pouring. Down his muscular frame, his eyes locked on Prescott like burning coals. The man screamed instinctively, flinging up his arms. But Samson didn't strike. Instead, the gorilla stared at him with a chilling, almost human disdain. Then, slowly and deliberately, Samson reached down and ripped the laminated security badge from Prescott's chest, holding it up once almost like evidence. He turned without a sound and disappeared into the storm, leaving the shivering man sprawled in the dirt. Meanwhile, deep inside the flooded vet wing, Dr. Winters had rallied a last-ditch search party for Max. The monsoon had turned the sanctuary into a maze of blind turns and submerged paths. Radios were spotty, flashlights were dim, and the wind drowned out all but the loudest shouts. "He won't have gotten far with those injuries," Winters said, her voice tight as she addressed the small group of soaked staffers. "Check low grounds and runoff channels. That's where he'll be hiding. He's hiding." But Max wasn't there anymore. Defying injury and logic, the little fighter had traveled an astonishing distance. What moved him was instinct, something deeper. Even as the rain tried to wash away every scent trail, he followed the faintest markers, like a map drawn in wind and memory. He wasn't just looking for Duke and Bella. He was heading toward something bigger, toward the place where Samson was about to arrive. Back near the perimeter, 2 of the intruders had been restrained by security, still soaked and furious. The third had managed to bolt during the skirmish, disappearing into the storm after dropping his weapon. Ranger Jack, mud-caked and bleeding from a head gash caused by flying debris, watched grimly as his team zip-tied the captives. "We'll sort IDs and charges when the sky calms down," he told them. "For now, get them to admin and keep them apart." As the detainees were escorted away, Duke and Bella stood rooted, muscles taut, eyes fixed on the dark. They didn't move. Jack, seasoned enough to understand the signals, frowned. "They're not done here," he muttered to one of the remaining guards. "They're waiting ... for someone." Right on cue, a faint yelp cracked through the wind. Duke's ears perked, and Bella shot forward, vanishing into the curtain of rain. Moments later, she returned, guiding a limping, bloodied Max. The pup's bandages hung like wet rags, streaked with fresh blood where stitches had split open. "Good grief," Jack whispered, dropping to his knees beside him. "How in God's name did you make it all the way out here?" But Max didn't seek comfort. When Jack reached out, Max let out a guttural growl so raw and unexpected that the ranger pulled his hand back, startled. The pup turned and glanced toward the storm again, glancing back at his parents. There was something urgent in his look, like a message. Duke stepped forward, letting Max press into his flank, while Bella took position on the other side. Together, the trio began limping, marching toward the far edge of the sanctuary. Jack stood slowly, watching them disappear into the rain. "They're trying to tell us something," he said to the guard, "and I think we better listen. They'd all learned the hard way when an animal acts strange. Listen." Jack grabbed his radio. "Tell backup to meet us at the east gate." The small group trudged slowly through the relentless storm, Jack and the security officer keeping pace behind the 3 German shepherds, even injured. Max refused to stop, his limp slowing them but not halting their mission. When they finally reached the eastern gate, Prescott's driver was still slumped in the stalled vehicle. His face frozen between terror and the fragile hope of seeing another human. "Something came at us," he cried. As they got closer, he thrust an arm toward the shadows. Prescott took off that way. Before Jack could reply, static crackled from the security officer's radio. Then, through the garbled noise, came Dr. Mitchell's voice, urgent and tight. "Emergency, Samson's habitat is breached. The gorilla's gone. All units respond." Now, Jack's stomach dropped. A missing gorilla in the middle of a storm was a nightmare scenario. Even a calm animal like Samson could turn dangerous if he felt cornered. Factor in armed trespassers, Prescott's suspicious behavior, and the storm ripping through the area, and the situation had suddenly become explosive. Jack was about to respond when Max collapsed. The puppy's legs gave out beneath him, small body sinking into the wet earth, blood bright against the mud. The journey had pushed him beyond his limits. "We've got to get him to the clinic now," Jack said, already bending to lift Max's fragile body. "Radio Dr. Winters, too." But the words stopped in his mouth. A massive shadow loomed just beyond the tree line. Samson. The rain poured off his broad shoulders. His eyes locked onto them with a calm, calculating intensity. In one enormous hand, he held something Jack's breath caught. Prescott's access badge. The security officer's hand went to his tranquilizer rifle, but Jack raised a hand. "Wait," he said, forcing his voice to stay even. "Look at him." Samson moved forward, slow and careful. There was no aggression in his posture. He stopped beside Max and peered down at the unconscious puppy. What happened next stunned him. With astonishing delicacy, the gorilla extended one thick finger and touched Max's side, checking for breath. Finding it faint but still present, Samson turned to Jack. Then, clearly and deliberately, he held out the badge. Even without words, the meaning was crystal clear. Prescott did this. Jack took the badge with a shaking hand. "He's trying to tell us something about Prescott," he whispered. In that moment, silent, rain-soaked, and profound, there was understanding. Not between species, but between beings. Then Max whimpered, a faint sound, but it galvanized Samson. The gorilla bent low and lifted the puppy into his arms with astonishing care, cradling him like a newborn. Bella and Duke, rather than growling or challenging him, moved to either side, their posture protective. They trusted him. To the clinic, Jack decided aloud, overriding every rule and instinct. "All of us together." He radioed ahead as they turned back toward the buildings. "Dr. Winters, incoming, be ready. And Dr. Mitchell, you're going to want to see this." Behind them, unnoticed in the chaos, Prescott dragged himself through the mud, face grim with pain. His ankle throbbed. His plan had collapsed, but his wealth was vast. This wasn't over, not yet. By dawn, the storm had finally loosened its grip. The wind died down, the rain slowed, and pale golden light began to filter through the broken clouds. The sanctuary had changed overnight. Trees lay fallen across walkways. Pools of water covered once dry land. Debris was everywhere, shredded signs, scattered tools, broken fencing. But all of it faded in urgency beside what was happening inside. The clinic. Dr. Winters moved with practiced intensity, trying to stabilize Max. His temperature had plunged, his stitches torn open again, blood loss severe. Breathing was labored. "More light over here," she barked, her hand steady, even if her heart was pounding. Two assistants shifted lamps into place. A third called out vitals, voice tight with stress. "Get warming blankets, blood expanders, and prep the post-op, antibiotics." But what made the scene so surreal wasn't the medicine. It was the audience. Samson sat motionless in the corner, his massive frame hunched to fit inside the room, eyes tracking every move. Bella and Duke curled at his feet, never once taking their eyes off their son. Dr. Mitchell observed from the side, documenting in silence, stunned. Ranger Jack stood watch at the door, face grim, his temps climbing, one assistant reported, heart rate. Dr. Winters nodded, stabilizing. Her fingers moved quickly, closing the wound again. "He's not giving up. This little guy's got more fight than most full-grown animals." In the corner, Samson made a soft noise somewhere between a hum and a sigh. Dr. Mitchell turned, watching the gorilla with awe. "He gets it," she said softly. "Look at his posture, the focus in his eyes. He's comprehending all of this at a level we've never seen." Dr. Winters tied off the final stitch, just as Max's mismatched eyes fluttered open, one blue, one brown. He scanned the room, humans' parents, and then Samson. The gorilla leaned in slightly. Max's tail tapped the table once. Then the pup's eyes closed, not from pain, but peace, sleep, real. Healing sleep. "We've got him stabilized," Dr. Winters announced at last, stepping back. "Still critical, but he's got a real shot. He's young, and that will to live." As the team gently transferred Max to a heated recovery enclosure, the door opened and Harriet Blackwood entered. Her clothes were wrinkled from the sleepless night, her eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. "Jack," she said, her Boston accent thick, "we need you at admin. State police are here. They're questioning the men we brought in last night." Jack gave a nod, then looked at Sampson and him. Harriet's expression softened as she watched the gorilla sit quietly by the pup's enclosure. "Let Dr. Mitchell handle it," she said. "For now." This arrangement, strange as it is, things were tense, but there wasn't time to argue protocols that would come later. Right now, they had to confront the real criminals, those who had broken into the sanctuary under the cover of chaos. Inside the administration office, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Two grim-faced state troopers were deep in questioning with the captured intruders. These weren't amateurs. They were experienced animal handlers, men with documented histories of violating federal laws around exotic wildlife. In another room, Prescott sat stiffly next to his attorney. The mud and blood cleaned from his skin, now clad in coveralls, his swollen ankle had been wrapped in a makeshift splint. "Mr. Thompson," one of the troopers said, acknowledging Jack as he walked in, "we're hearing some pretty wild claims from these men. Says they were hired to extract a gorilla during the storm." Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't even sit down. "They were trespassing with tranquilizer rifles. One of them shot at our dogs." His voice was calm, but the fury sat just beneath. The officer raised an eyebrow. "They're insisting Mr. Prescott gave them clearance, that he told them the animal had to be removed due to a prior breach for public safety." Jack didn't blink. "That's a flat-out lie," he said coldly. "Prescott has been trying to take this land and our animals for years. This wasn't about safety. This was a straight-up theft." Though the officer kept his tone measured, something in his eyes hinted he believed Jack. "We'll need written statements from everyone who witnessed anything, and complete access to your surveillance feeds." Jack nodded. "You'll get it, and there's something else. We're starting to think this whole thing ties into a much bigger wildlife smuggling ring." While the investigation ramped up inside the veterinary building, Dr. Mitchell was still documenting something equally incredible: the unshakable connection between Sampson, the gorilla, and the recovering puppy he'd rescued. As Max rested in his enclosure, Sampson stayed nearby, watchful, protective, his occasional low murmurs acting like lullabies. "This isn't ordinary," Dr. Mitchell murmured into her recorder. "We're witnessing interspecies communication at a level that disrupts what we thought we knew about animal intelligence. Sampson isn't just reacting, he's empathizing, he's reasoning." Her voice trembled slightly with awe. As she continued her notes, a lab tech stepped in, holding a report. The results from the darts used by the intruders were in. The numbers made her stomach drop. "These dosages are off the charts," the technician said quietly. "At least 3 times the limit for a gorilla Sampson's size. If he'd been hit, he wouldn't have made it," Dr. Mitchell finished for him, eyes wide. "This wasn't a transport op. They meant to kill him," the tech asked, confused. "Why? Doesn't Prescott want the gorilla for his exotic collection?" "No," Dr. Mitchell whispered, mind spinning. "Sampson's different. He's showing signs of advanced cognition-emotional reasoning, theory of mind. If we publish our findings, it could force lawmakers to reevaluate ape protection laws. And that would bring scrutiny on Prescott on everything he owns." The implication hung in the air like smoke. What had started as a break-in was beginning to look like a cover-up, one meant to destroy proof that could append the black market trade in exotic animals. Word of the lab findings spread fast among the sanctuary staff. Back in the admin building, Harriet presented the test results to the officers. Their demeanor changed immediately. "This just went federal," one said, standing. "We're getting a search warrant for Prescott's estate. Endangered species laws are in play now." Still, Prescott didn't flinch. Years of legal fencing had made him fluent in denial. "Gentlemen," he said smoothly, "this is all." "Absurd. Yes, the animal escaped earlier. These were precautionary measures. My men may have acted too forcefully, but only out of fear for public safety." His lawyer chimed in, equally slick. "Mr. Prescott has invested millions in conservation programs. To accuse him of criminal intent is slanderous and motivated by the sanctuary's financial troubles." But the mood had turned. The officers weren't buying it, and neither were the staff. All morning, statements were logged, digital evidence archived, legal teams assembled. The sanctuary's board called an emergency meeting, tension thick in the air. Faces were tight with worry, not just about lawsuits, but public perception. "Let's be real," one board member said sharply. "We've got a 300-pound gorilla roaming among staff and dogs." Protocols were shattered. This is a liability. Nightmare waiting to happen. Harriet snapped, "That gorilla saved a newborn's life twice. He's shown cognitive behaviors that could reshape ape conservation policy, and he's helped expose a criminal operation. That's not a threat, that's a hero." The board members sighed, hero or not. One wrong move, and we're shut down. For good, while the debate dragged on, another moment was unfolding just across the compound. In the clinic, Max had fully regained consciousness. Dr. Winters gave the go-ahead for a short reunion with his parents. Duke and Bella crept toward their puppy's cage, tails low, eyes anxious. They sniffed and whined softly, every sense that Max was truly okay. Then, something remarkable happens, something no one had anticipated. And fortunately, Dr. Mitchell's camera was still rolling. Samson, who had quietly kept his distance, responded to a soft sound from Max. The injured pup had turned toward the gorilla and let out a quiet, hopeful yip. Samson slowly extended one massive finger through the bars, and Max, wounded, limping yet entirely unafraid, lifted his paw and pressed it gently against Samson's finger. A moment of pure trust, of unspoken understanding. Duke and Bella watched with calm acceptance. No growling, no tension, as if they understood what Samson meant to their family now. It defied every rule in the book about animal behavior. It wasn't just tolerance, it was recognition. Dr. Mitchell leaned toward Dr. Winters, her voice hushed with emotion. "This is no fluke. They see each other as equals, as companions. This is real cross-species friendship." And just as she said it, a convoy of black SUVs pulled into the sanctuary. Federal wildlife agents stepped out, armed not with rifles, but with court orders and authority. What they brought with them, what they were about to uncover, would not only redefine Samson's fate, but shake the very foundations of animal protection law. The entire investigation turned on the evidence. Seized that morning during the federal search of Prescott's estate, inside his study, agents discovered shipping logs, wire transfers, and encrypted communications pointing to a sprawling international network smuggling endangered species. The lead agent addressed Harriet and the board with a grim tone. "Appears Prescott's legitimate exotic animal operation was just a front. He's been using it to traffic protected wildlife across borders." The agent paused, letting the weight of that land before continuing. And according to these files, he was preparing for a large-scale move. One that required silencing witnesses and destroying anything that could lead back to him. A board member leaned forward, tense. What kind of witness? In response, the agent slid a thick folder across the table. Inside, a photo of a gorilla. Not just any gorilla, one whose behavior had begun to raise serious questions. That gorilla's name was Samson. His unusual cognitive responses had attracted quiet attention from researchers' responses that, if made public, could trigger a national debate over private ownership of primates. 2 weeks after the devastating storm had slammed through Whispering Pines, the wildlife sanctuary cautiously reopened its gates. The walking trails were cleared, broken fences rebuilt, but something intangible had shifted. The place felt different, marked. On that soft, bright morning, Ranger Jack Thompson guided a small group down the sanctuary's central path. Face, lined from years in the sun, carried the lightest smile it had worn in weeks. The sanctuary, once on the brink of collapse, had survived, and not just survived, grown stronger. Prescott was behind bars now, denied bail after authorities, unearthed offshore accounts, and a hidden airstrip on his land. The raid had revealed a trafficking scheme that stretched across continents, Asia, South America, and Africa, funneling rare species into black markets for astronomical sums. Just up ahead, Jack said to the group, is what we've named the integration habitat. The group, an eclectic mix of high-profile guests, a pair of senior representatives from the National Wildlife Federation, a Harvard behaviorist, and an elderly couple who had supported the sanctuary since its earliest days load as the habitat came into view. It was like nothing they'd seen before. Spacious, sun-dappled, and carefully designed. The enclosure featured distinct yet interconnected zones, one suited for primates, the other for canines, with clear corridors that allowed monitored interaction. At the heart of it all, under careful observation, Samson sat calmly atop a large branch. Nearby Max, the sanctuary's beloved canine, now healed and alert, wagged his tail as he watched Duke and Bella. "This is unprecedented," the Harvard professor whispered, flipping open a notebook already covered in scribbles. "I've studied wild interspecies bonds, but this level of cross-species cooperation, this intention, is something else." The older man, 83-year-old Walter Harrison, steadied himself on his cane and nodded slowly. "I've been around animals a long time," he said, voice thick with feeling, "but I never imagined I'd see something like this. Different species, not just tolerating but choosing to care for each other like family." His wife Margaret added, "Maybe they're teaching us, not the other way around." Dr. Evelyn Mitchell, the sanctuary's lead scientist, approached with bright eyes and a fire in her voice. "What you're seeing," she said, "is just the beginning. The testing we've done with Samson is rewriting everything we thought we knew about gorilla intelligence. And the dogs, especially Max with his mismatched eyes, they're solving problems together." As if on cue, Max trotted toward Samson, a worn red ball in his jaws. He dropped it gently at the gorilla's feet. Samson studied the object for a beat, then rolled it back. Max pounced with delight, tail wagging in pure joy. "They've created games," said Dr. Mitchell, watching the interaction with something like awe. "They've even developed their own signals. We're documenting new behaviors almost every day." The Harvard professor adjusted his glasses, clearly moved. "The implications for interspecies cognition are staggering." "Have you submitted anything yet?" "Our first study's already been accepted by Nature," Evelyn confirmed, "but the more immediate impact may come legally. The evidence from this case has triggered a review on how great apes are classified. If it goes through, private ownership could be outlawed entirely." Walter's eyes lit up. "About time," and that low-life Prescott, Jack's expression tightened. "The feds are finding more every day. So far, he's been tied to at least 7 major wildlife smuggling rings. The python that nearly killed Max, barely the start. They've recovered over 40 rare animals from his estate, most of them illegally brought in." "Scum," Margaret muttered, shaking her head. "People like that shouldn't be allowed within 100 miles of animals." Just then, Samson raised his hand and made a deliberate gesture toward a nearby trainer. She responded with a nod, pressing a button that opened a secure gate. Duke and Bella trotted into the central enclosure, where fresh fruit had been placed on a stone platform. "Wait, they eat together now?" one of the Wildlife Federation guests asked. 3 times a week, Dr. Mitchell confirmed. Samson started eat after Max's recovery. He began saving fruit, offering it to him. Then Max started bringing his parents. The group stood in quiet amazement as they watched the 4 animals settle in for their shared meal. Samson broke mangoes and melons into bite-sized chunks, nudging them toward the dogs with impressive care. Duke kept a respectful distance, but his relaxed posture spoke volumes. Bella, cautious but trusting, accepted a slice of papaya from Samson's massive hand. And Max moved freely between all of them, the quiet link holding the group together. "You know," Walter said, his voice warm with reverence, "folks like to say animals are all instinct, just reacting to hunger or fear. But what I see here, this is something else. This is choice, choosing trust, choosing family." Margaret slipped her hand into his. "Maybe we should take notes from them," she said softly. "Seems like they figured something out that we forgot." As the others continued the tour, Dr. Mitchell lingered by the enclosure. She always did, not out of duty, but because something about that space, about those animals, had changed her. Samson ambled over, dark eyes steady as he studied her face. After all this time, that gaze still struck her so present, so aware. "You've changed everything," she whispered. "Not just for yourself, for every gorilla out there, maybe even the ones still in the wild." He tilted his head, listening. Then, in a gesture she had seen only a handful of times, Samson slowly touched his chest, his sign for me, and extended his arm toward Max. A declaration, a bridge, a bond, and perhaps a message. And his parents, then back to Dr. Mitchell, who nodded slowly, grasping his intent with that rare kind of clarity born from months of hard-earned trust and silent understanding. "You're not alone anymore," she said quietly, her voice catching with emotion. "We're all here now, and we'll make sure you stay together." Across the open habitat, Max let out a single bark, sharp and full of meaning, his mismatched eyes reflecting the warm gold of the late afternoon sun. Duke and Bella stepped forward, close to their son, as if sensing a shift, while Samson climbed back onto his familiar boulder, resuming his quiet role as sentry watching, always watching, over this improbable family whose love had defied everything anyone thought they knew about nature. They were no longer an experiment. They were a promise. Inside the main office, Harriet Blackwood scrawled her name across the last set of papers, the ink barely dry before she exhaled in relief. Whispering Pines was now official the country's first sanctioned research and sanctuary center for cross-species emotional bonding. What started as a desperate rescue had turned into a groundbreaking movement, one that dared to imagine a future where humans didn't just study other beings, but truly listened to them. A future built on mutual respect, understanding, and the kind of heart-driven action that doesn't make headlines, but changes everything. As we grow older, it's easy to believe the best is behind us, that the world's marvels belong to the young. But the story of Samson and little Max whispers otherwise. It reminds us that wonder doesn't disappear with age, it deepens. Think back. We were raised to see animals as simple creatures, ruled by survival, by instinct. But this silverback gorilla, a weathered soul from another world, and a bold little shepherd pup with one brown eye and one blue, they rewrote that belief. Their bond wasn't logical, it was emotional. It was the kind of bond that reflects the marriages that lasted through storms, the friendships that held firm in silence, the kind of love that never asks for permission. When the world tells us we're too old to change, too stubborn to learn, stories like theirs rise up like a quiet challenge. If Samson, a creature of immense strength and primal memory, could choose love over fear, and Max, a pup barely past weaning, could find a father in a creature who couldn't speak his language, then maybe we're not done growing either. Maybe there's still time to build those bridges we thought were out of reach. Maybe the best chapters aren't the ones we remember, but the ones we haven't yet lived. So when someone laughs at your dreams or calls you to set in your ways, tell them this: even a gorilla can change. Even a puppy can lead. And sometimes life's greatest moments don't show up when we're young and strong, but when we're open, quiet, and brave enough to believe again.